All right, well, so for the people who look at you and say, you know what, I like him, but we've done the one-term senator thing.
Yeah.
And it didn't really work out.
Well, first of all, I think it's actually unfair to compare anyone in the Republican field to Barack Obama. He was uniquely unqualified to run for president. I think everyone in our field has more experience than he did. The second thing to remember is Barack Obama hasn't failed as president because he only served 2 years in the Senate before he started running. He failed because his ideas don't work. Even if he had been there 50 years, his ideas wouldn't have worked. I also think it's important to remember, I wasn't born in November of 2010. I mean, well before that, I served in local government. I served in the state government for 9 years. I was the Speaker of the Florida House. I ran that institution in addition to doing the policy in that institution. I've been in the Senate now for 4.5 years. Well, I've served an entire 6-year term where I've been intricately involved in intelligence issues, and foreign relations issues. So we'll talk about our track record. We're proud of it. But again, this agenda, this campaign is about the future and how we're going to make the 21st century a new American century.
On Syria, what is your red line for Bashar al-Assad?
My red line was crossed a long time ago, and it was crossed when I saw early on in this campaign. I talked about this as far back as 2011. I said there is an anti-Assad uprising by Syrians that is not Islamist. They want to get rid of a terrible person who happens to be a sponsor of terrorism, a puppet of Iran. And if we don't help these people to become the best armed, best equipped, and best trained element in opposition to Assad, it will leave a vacuum that will be filled by foreign fighters. I said that very clearly back in the early stages of this conflict. We did not act on it. That is what has happened. I ultimately believe Assad needs to be removed. He needs to be removed by Syrians, not foreigners that have now poured in there. And I still believe, I have hope, that we can find elements we can work with on the ground in Syria, not just to remove him, but then to govern the country. It's become harder to do because those non-Islamist elements have either been killed, have left. Some, quite frankly, have just given up and sought refuge in Jordan or in other places. But it's still something we need to do because ultimately, Assad cannot maintain himself in power. You cannot have stability in the Middle East going forward if Assad remains in power in Syria for the long term. And all of our allies in the region will tell you that is what's holding some of them back from participating even more in this anti-ISIS crusade. Is their view of it. The problem will still be there. If you get rid of ISIS, al-Nusra will then step into the void and they'll fill it. Assad needs to be removed as part of an overall strategy.
But it sounds like another war. It sounds like to U.S. citizens listen to that, here we go again.
Well, again, I'm talking about arming, equipping, training Syrians to take back their own country from a brutal dictator who gassed his own people, who even now is dropping chlorine bombs on his own people, who's very capable of using other weapons of that type to kill his own people. That's what I'm talking about. Now, can the U.S. play a constructive role in arming, training, targeted airstrikes to help it along? Those are things that are on the table. But ultimately, Assad is a puppet of Iran. He is a key part of Iran's ambitions to dominate the region. And he should not make, he needs to go. That was my line 3 years ago, and it remains the case now. It's become harder, unfortunately, because the White House dithered for too long on a strategy.
Budget. The sequester is a main reason deficits have come down in the past several years. But critics say it's hurting our defense readiness, capabilities. Was the sequester a mistake?
I voted against it because I don't think the national debt is being driven by defense spending. In fact, the national debt isn't being driven by discretionary spending, the things the sequester is impacting. The national debt is being driven by the fact that Medicare and Social Security are going to go bankrupt. And every year we are borrowing money to fill the gap. And that's a problem that gets worse every single year. We now have, I think, 3 workers for every retiree. It will one day become 2 workers for every retiree. And that is going to bankrupt the country if we don't address it. I want to save Social Security and Medicare. My mother is on Social Security and Medicare. But in order for us to save it, people in my generation, if we want to save Social Security and Medicare without impacting the people on it now, which is what I want to do, people in my generation, I'm 44 years old, people younger than me as well, are going to have to accept that our Medicare and Social Security is going to look different than our parents did. It's still going to be the best thing in the world, but it's going to have to be different. We're going to have to work another year longer. Our benefits will be indexed differently. Medicare for us might be the ability to take that money and go out and buy a private plan. But that's what we have to do, not only if we want to deal with the debt, but if we want to keep Social Security and Medicare the same way it is now for the people on it today.
So in 2010, you ran here in Florida.
I did.
On entitlement reform.
I did.
Is that a major part of the 2016 campaign?
Well, look, just this last couple weeks, the CBO came out with a projection, and it said, yes, deficits have come down. Deficits are the annual amount we're borrowing. We're still borrowing money, But the debt is set to explode over the next 10 years as 10,000 people a day are retiring in the boomer generation. The numbers don't lie. I believe the next president of the United States will not be able to serve 2 full terms without dealing with the debt crisis. And I think it's important for us to be honest with the American people that we still have time to save those programs without impacting the people that are on it now, but preserving it for future generations.
But do you sense that Republicans are losing their nerve a bit on entitlements?
Well, I think what's happened is the reality that this president isn't going to spend any political capital on entitlement reform, and Harry Reid and the Democrats are intent on demagoguing it. But I've told everybody very frankly, anyone who comes to you and says, I want to leave Social Security and Medicare the way it is now forever, without any changes, is in favor of bankrupting it. I want to leave Social Security and Medicare exactly the way it is for people that are retired or about to retire, but I know it's going to have to change for people like me, or it won't exist.
My point is that Republicans aren't exactly a profile in courage on this either. I mean, the Medicare reforms in Paul Ryan's budget did not get included in the Senate budget last spring.
I think there's
why
a sense, because I think there's a sense, and I can't answer for everyone that's involved in this debate, but I think the sense is that as long as this president's in the White House, we're wasting our time and spinning our wheels, because he's not going to, you can't do this without presidential leadership. It is an extraordinarily important issue, and one that does require executive leadership by the President of the United States. This president has shown no willingness to do that.
The heinous act in Charleston, killing those 9 people in that church, has sparked a lot of response, all sides. Mitt Romney tweeted out that the South Carolina Capitol, the South Carolina government, should remove the Confederate battle flag from South Carolina's Capitol grounds. What do you think?
Well, first of all, it's a terrible thing that's happened. It's a horrifying thing that's happened there, and it's unimaginable that people would go into a church to pray and someone would commit an act of this kind, clearly motivated by hatred based on his feelings towards race. It's an outrage and it's heartbreaking, and our thoughts and prayers go out to the people of South Carolina, and in particular the families impacted by it. On the specific issue you've outlined, that's one that South Carolina has grappled with for a long time. About a decade ago or more, they reached some sort of consensus involving all sides of the debate, and they moved the flag to its current location. I think ultimately the people of South Carolina are capable of having that debate again, and whether it's because of this incident or something else, I think they are more than capable of figuring it out for themselves. South Carolina has proven to be a resilient state. The reactions in South Carolina to some of the incidents over the last 6 months have been different than in other places. You had an individual murdered by a police officer, and the response of the community and law enforcement agencies together with their government officials is extraordinary, as was the case again now. I have a lot of confidence that the people of South Carolina will work their way through it. In Florida, we don't have that flag over the Capitol. It's in a museum. That's the decision that was made in Florida under Governor Bush. South Carolina, I believe, is fully capable of making this decision, and I think they'll make the one that they've arrived at as the right one. I have a lot of confidence in that state and how well their people work together on issues such as this. And I think they're fully capable. They have shown the ability to work through these issues, and I think it's incumbent not to have a bunch of outsiders in there telling them what to do. They're headed as a people in the right direction in that state, and I have a lot of confidence that they'll be able to figure out the right thing to do.
That flag is obviously generating a lot of controversy, but also the issue of guns comes every time there's one of these heinous acts. And if you were to be the nominee, your likely opponent, Hillary Clinton, is out saying something has to be done on gun control in some way, shape, or form, endorsing what the president said about it. Where do you stand?
Well, I believe in the Second Amendment, right to possess and possess arms and protect your family. Here's what's interesting. We don't know all the facts about this case yet, but it appears from the facts we do know that this individual, this monster, got access to a weapon in violation of the law. In essence, he was not supposed to be in possession of a firearm, and he was. It was a handgun, not an automatic rifle or anything like this. And it appears that he had access to it illegally because it was purchased for him, because he had psychiatric problems, etc. My point is that laws are only as good as the people's willingness to follow them. And what will happen if you have gun laws is law-abiding people will follow the law, and criminals, who by definition violate the law, will ignore it. And so while I certainly understand people's concerns that these acts are being committed with a handgun, the truth is that many, if not all, of the laws they advocate for would not have prevented any of these acts. This crime was not committed by a gun. It was committed by a hateful individual who went in and killed 9 innocent people for no reason other than the hate in his heart.
I mean, what about this? I mean, you're ready for all of this back and forth?
You know, well, let me tell you something. One of the reasons why Barack Obama's president today is because Republicans spent too much time attacking each other in the last election. A lot of it egged on by the media. I see it now. They're like rooting for me to say something against somebody else. Yeah. I think it's important we all have differences, and we got to talk about the differences between us as candidates. But I hope we all understand that in about 9 months, we're all going to be on the same team. And I'm certainly going to govern myself in that way. And because I really don't think that we can afford another 4 to 8 years of Democratic leadership. And that's what we might get if we end up just destroying each other.